Hey guys, this is Tom Box, and welcome to an episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta Trends, where we grab all of the information of this week, cram it into one episode, and spoon feed it to you so you guys can adapt it to your next event. Something like that. Whether it be locals or whether you have a regionals coming up, this information is probably going to be useful for you, because today we're talking about the top decks, the expectations of the top decks, and deck trends in general. And it seems like Konami has a very specific direction they're going now. This format, cards that you should be playing in this format, and how to adapt this format with even more cards that you should be playing. So stick around, guys, and if you guys want to see more stuff like this, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up and hit subscribe, ding the notification bell, and let's just jump into it. So are structure decks becoming meta again? That is the question, and based off of current trends, it would seem so, with many players playing Dark World at YCS Vegas and finding success with the deck. And a lot of that makes a lot of sense, because, first of all, the ban list really hurt like tier limits, to the point that the focus on the deck to beat has shifted from, say, tier limits to Cash Tira. And even Cash Tira focused their attention on Cash Tira, and they don't want to main dead cards. So a lot of the graveyard hate is gone, such as D-Shifter, Bestial cards, DD Crow. All of that graveyard hate has shifted more or less to the side deck, opening an opportunity for Dark World to play. And Dark World can play through hand traps, but, well, Cash Tira, not as adjusted for that. But I'm just saying, this is an opportunity for Dark World to play, so they are taking their chances with that. As for the second deck to kind of point out is Trap Trick. Now this one is really new. I mean, it's like yesterday new. So why is this one seeing a lot more success? Well, it's based off of the current format, because it's a control format, more or less. There are many more control decks than I expected in this current format, but it is what it is. And Trap Trick is another one of those control decks that can go toe-to-toe against Cash Tira with enough disruption from multiple lines that it's going to find success. And you know, at the $10 a piece, 3 of these structure decks will more or less get you there, and you can already compete with some of the best out there. So these are some of the better options. Okay, so for the top decks, I kind of want to revisit the damage report tier list potential to see how accurate you are compared to YCS Vegas. So we kind of overlay the results on top, just to see how things are. So in terms of like the top decks, we have Branded Bestial and Cash Tira, both of which very successful and to be expected. I mean, they did have the top tier potential immediately stamped onto them, so if they didn't perform, I would be shockingly surprised. But yeah, Cash Tira, a lot of people thought that it wasn't going to be as good, but they are as good as they seem. And then there's also a Sword Soul contender within the top cut. There's also Dark World players. A lot of them did not make the top cut within YCS Vegas because the team didn't make it. However, a lot of the solo results were pretty good. And you know what? You just got to give it to those guys for just piloting the deck and seeing that there is an opportunity to play this deck with, well, without being completely hindered. I get that Cash Tira, a Rise Hard, does make it very hard for Dark World to play, so they do have to play a couple of cards to just turn that one card off, and they can break the rest of the board, no problem. I mean, that deck is just all gas and no breaks. So in terms of like the high tier potential, we have Naturia Runic. Combine the two, and you're looking at Pack's team. We have Cody Angeloff and both Pack playing this deck. And I tried the deck out myself. I've been trying every single meta deck just to kind of get a grasp of what the format is about and what cards we should be playing, or what cards I would be playing at locals and not telling anyone. But you have Naturia Runic. This deck, if you don't know what you're doing, especially when the first couple of test plays, you're going to be like, this deck doesn't do enough. But once you get the flow of the deck, you'll be like, this deck, although the deck is super tight, it offers you so much to play. If you have, basically, if you're a skilled player, you can reach the high skill ceiling. If you're not a skilled player, I would not recommend the Naturia Runic deck, especially when you can't grind out a game and you have to be careful of the battle phase. Another control deck that was very successful, I believe another top cut player and also a world champion, Ryan Yu, is the one that piloted or showcased the Labyrinth deck. Labyrinth deck, interestingly enough, is a full-on heavy trap deck, and for good reason. This time he's not going to get screwed over by a Rivalry of Warlords because he's the one playing it. A very, very small monster count, almost feels like Eldritch, but this is just way cooler, way better, and definitely has one of the best grind games out there, and perfectly able to disrupt Cash Tira. I mean, everything's kind of geared towards stopping Cash Tira, but it does flow into stopping a lot of the other decks as well, like Gozen matches. Pretty rough stuff for a lot of the decks out there. And then there's also Ninjas. Jesse Cotton chose to play Ninjas for the event, and he also showcased Ninja, and Ninjas was also had a showing in the previous YCS the week back. It is a very strong deck, but again, A lot of the things about control deck is that if you don't understand how to play the deck, you will feel like the deck doesn't do anything. You're playing into a lot of dead ends. But you have to be skillful enough to understand where the lines can take you, which card activation should be prioritized as the first card to use. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to benefit off of this. So yeah, these are some of the top decks, and I think there's going to be another control deck introduced into the format, which was going to be Trap Trick. The deck is very good at disruption, and a lot of the like exclusive releases in that structure deck just really pushes that deck to the next level, giving them additional summons, giving them the ability to disrupt the opponents with monsters and summons, which previously was heavily, pushed towards the responsibilities of the trap cards. Now it's spread between the monsters and the traps. It just becomes a much more well-rounded deck. But as for the things that didn't perform, Gishki sprites, the banning of Sprite Elf definitely did a number on this deck, and because this deck is so control heavy, it makes it very hard for them to establish. But I wouldn't write them off just yet. I think that they just need to find the correct build, and I believe there was a pure Sprite top within the regionals of whichever one that Din Kang Fam played in. He managed to play sprites and get either he went undefeated or he top. Whatever it is, it was a really amazing result. As for tier elements, why did they not perform very well? A lot of people hyped it out. They looked at OCG. And here's the thing when you have to compare with OCG for this thing. Kashtira was at full power at the same time of tier elements, okay? And when both of them were competing against each other at full power, tier elements had the edge. Tier elements Kashtira was probably the most powerful deck at that time in OCG. However, here in TCG, we have a slight power scale shift here, where Kashtira is full power, but tier elements more or less is completely neutered at this point. They do not have the full package, if you guys know what I mean. So you're looking at a Kashtira deck that is already geared to be very, very strong against tier element, and you're hoping that tier elements can actually gamble on some of their mills. Their mills are not going to be as easy, and because there's so many one-ofs, it makes it so that the Kashtira Birth, banishing some of your names, that could be just a completely crippling and fatal play against the tier element deck that it's just not really worth taking that chance, especially at an event with this many players and this many rounds. So that's probably why the tier elements did not perform very well. I get that if they built their full board, they would probably have about 5 disruptions or so, but a lot of this can be turned off with a Lava Golem or a Book of Eclipse, so seeing that those are flying around, it's just not the easiest time for tier elements for sure. Anyways, that's kind of the cover for the top decks. So this meta is really shaping up to be a control meta. I mean, by control, I mean there's a lot of back row. And when there's a lot of back row, who do you call? Denko Sekka. That's right. Control meta, Denko Sekka. Terrible joke, moving on, but why? Well, even though half the meta right now is mainly control deck, we're looking at 4 different decks, like Trap Tricks, we're looking at Ninjas, Labyrinth, and I guess to some degree Runic. Runic doesn't really set cards, so let's just exclude Runic for now. But those decks, they do play, and they're very oppressive when they land their back row. And you're just basically playing an uphill battle if they have all of that stuff set up. Denko Sekka really just shuts all those plays down. But on top of that, if you're playing Kashtira, Branded, Sword Soul, all of those decks, you also have back row. You have enemy controllers, Book of Moons, all those good cards. Compulse. What else do you want me to name? There's just so much D barriers that you don't preemptively activate. There's a lot of back row right now, and Denko Sekka can just help you shut all that down for one turn. Sure, it's not going to last forever. Every single deck, I believe, has an out against Denko Sekka when it gets back to their turn. Denko Sekka's stat line isn't high enough, and currently, based off of what I know, I don't think Kashtira can play Denko Sekka. Unfortunately, I want to play her so bad. She's my favorite card in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And she doesn't fit into Kashtira yet. If you guys find out a way to put her into a Kashtira deck, and have a perfect flow option that doesn't require 3 cards to play, then leave it down in the comment section. But back onto Denko. Why is Denko still recommended? Because it is the red reboot that we don't have. It buys you 1 turn. If you can use 1 turn to clear off the board and maintain control and tempo, this is the one card to do it, as long as you can trade your normal summon. Kashtira can't trade the normal summon, even with birth. They can't just birth a monster out after you normal summon out Denko. And if you summon out Unicorn first, Unicorn gets disrupted. Denko, what's the point of summoning out Denko now? It's completely pointless. And Denko would probably just die. Ninjas probably just tag into your Gurumaru, banish it. Labyrinth, is probably the one deck that I would say struggles the most, but the moment you drop a Kashtira monster, they're going to flip a floodgate, preventing you from dropping the Denko. That's my prediction of how to survive a Denko. Shouldn't really give you that much advice right now, but that's kind of it. But if you can't play Denko Saga, what else can you play? I 100% recommend Lightning Storm. Just clears front row, back row. It's perfect. Evenly matched, that's just always been part of the game for clearing everything, and one of the hardest things to stop because it's non-destructive. Yeah, those two, 100% recommend. Two cards that are surging in popularity is gotta be Forbidden Chalice and Forbidden Lance for Kashtira. Yes, this is a Kashtira recommendation. I kind of split the builds into like Adventure Kashtira versus like the Forbidden Kashtira, because the Forbidden stuff, I would recommend that to any of the players that are more skilled with their chaining timing, and maybe still try out a little bit of Ibli depending, because right now the format is so split 50-50 that not everyone's going to main deck Nibiru, which is why you can kind of get away with this. You can get away with not having the Ibli in the deck. You can side the Ibli. You should still probably side it, just because people are going to put in the Nibiru and it becomes a counter side pick still, so it's still pretty decent. Whereas the other build, which is the adventure build, you get an Omni Negate, which is great, and you have different ways of breaking boards, but your extra deck becomes a lot tighter. Those ones I would recommend to people that don't want to think about the chaining as much, and if they're a bit more novice, then Adventure Kashtira would be for them if they're willing to spend the money. Now let's go back to Forbidden Chalice and Lance. Let's start with Chalice. Why are we seeing more Chalice plays? Number one is the ban list. The ban list allowed for Chalice to come back in. If Sprite Elf was in the format, we would never see Chalice. Everyone's just going to protect their best cards, and Chalice will never do anything. But right now, what Chalice negates, tons of the best cards, and has the best timing. In terms of like going second negation timing cards, Forbidden Chalice, I think bar none, is probably the one with the best timing. You can hit stuff in the damage step, you can hit stuff such as Mirror Jade, you can hit, Arise Hard, Baron, like just all of the best cards. You can always just chain and target, and it seems like Yu-Gi-Oh has been pulling back on the anti-targeting monster. Like there's very few of them. There's Dragoon, there's Avramax, but if you look at the recent releases of boss monsters, a lot of them, they are targetable, and I think that's actually a good direction for the game. Otherwise the power scale would be like, oh, activate this effect, banish whatever card that you want. Even like Arise Heart isn't like that. Arise Heart still banishes, requires like basically targeting on the thing that it banishes. That's what I want to say. And so yeah, Chalice is some of the cards with the best timing, so you can stop all the boss monsters. You can stop stuff like Yugioh, so your stuff doesn't get flip base down. It offers you these kinds of options, and I think that's fantastic. The game becomes a lot more interactive, and it isn't just about just dominating the other guy because I got to the monster. Now, as for Lance, Lance is literally one of the most flexible counterplay cards in the entire game. I mean, it literally stops everything else. When people aren't main decking Nibiru, because, half the format is mainly control decks, and the other half would be the decks that would be impacted by Nibiru. Well, that being said, it's 50-50, so many people choose not to main deck it unless they really hate a certain matchup, or they understand that their locals is just made up of those decks. Okay, fine, makes sense. But when it comes to like dealing whatever else that is in the main deck, we're looking at Book of Moon, Book of Eclipse, enemy controllers, we're looking at imperms, like Dancing Leaf. I guess Dancing Leaf is irrelevant, but like we're looking at a ton of different cards that are in the back row that could target your monster, and because of one copy of Lance, you get to play right through it, and they would probably not see it coming because it's coming from your hand. And letting you outplay your opponent by committing one card by reducing your own attack, I think people don't think that that's offensive or anything. Like, oh, that's just an overly dominant card. No, they think this is that they got outplayed, or they just didn't read that you had a Lance. It's more like that than anything else. But that's why also Lance is very powerful, because it is a very flexible counterplay card against some of the back rows that are available in the game that is typically main decked. Well, that's more or less it for me for this meta trend. Hopefully you guys can update your decks and probably adapt to a lot of the new trap holes that are going to be coming out from the Trap Trick deck. Thank you guys for watching. Check out MSTmerch.com to help support this channel. Get some awesome sleeves, white sleeves, black sleeves, box dividers, sort your collection, get some awesome mats. I got you guys covered. And if you want to protect your sleeves, you got over sleeves for you guys as well. And thank you guys for watching, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next one.